Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Corporate Renewable Energy Transition in China. My name is Shushan Khachaturian, and I'm Senior Project Manager in Solarplaza. To explore the corporate renewable energy situation in Asia, Solarplaza has started a webinar series dedicated to exploring this very interesting topic. Last week, we had a webinar already focused on corporate renewable energy transition in Southeast Asia. If you have missed that webinar, then you can already access the recordings and the slides at our website. Our today's webinar will be focused on corporate renewable energy transition in China. During the webinar, we will look at the market opportunity and bottlenecks for corporations to power their operations by renewable energy. Here you can see an overview of our agenda for today. As you can see, we have 2 Q&A sessions. This means that we encourage everyone to ask questions already from the start of the webinar. And I can show you how to do it. So for questions and technical issues, please use the chat box in the dashboard of this webinar software. And of course, the presentation slides will be available afterwards. We will send it to you by email. For those of you that don't know about Solarplaza, we are a knowledge platform of over 50,000 PV professionals, and our goal is to accelerate the energy transition. Our main business is organizing high-level conferences and trade missions, and in the past years, we have organized over 80 events in more than 25 countries in Europe, US, but also in emerging markets. And lastly, our corporate renewable energy topic will be a large discussion during our upcoming conference, Unlocking Solar Capital Asia. So I would like to suggest to put the dates on your calendar. It's almost in a month, 1st and 2nd of November. This year we are collaborating with Asia Clean Energy Summit, where you have a chance to meet over 1,000 industry representatives. A place to learn from the experts in the region and meet the solar PV value chain in Asia. With this, I would like to finish the introduction and pass the stage to our very interesting speakers. We have Rasmus from ACT Renewables and Shailesh from RE100. I will pass the stage to Rasmus. He will introduce more about ACT Renewables and their work, and then we will proceed with Shailesh regarding RE100. Rasmus, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me and ACT Renewable as a speaker for this interesting topic. I don't know, Marco, if we can move to the next slide.
Yes, give me a second.
That's fine, absolutely.
There you go.
Thank you very much. Please, next slide. So, yes, it's great to be part of this interesting topic, and I will throw a few numbers at you in a second. But before we get into this, I just want to briefly touch on who ACT Renewable is. We're an independent advisory company based in Munich with hubs in Hong Kong as well. Our focus is to simplify renewable energy transition for multinational corporates. So we basically support corporates with insights, company-specific analytics on renewable transition on a global scale to make sure that they can make the right decisions on how to transition into renewables. We are a joint venture, partly owned by BioR Renewable Energy and Reset Carbon, and that gives us a stronghold in basically in most of the world except for South America. We are actually present with consultants and expertise globally. But Asia is, for us, a really strong and interesting area, especially because this is what a lot of our clients are struggling with. and therefore we wanted to join this this webinar. The topics that we've meet and that we will be highlighting today together with Giles from RE100 is really how can corporates deal with large production footprints and supply chain in China in combination with high emission footprint from the Chinese energy generation when these corporates and the supply chain in the future will be going renewable. It's also interesting to understand what are the existing opportunities of renewables in China. And as I'm assume that most of you are aware of, China is actually one of the areas in the world where we're seeing most renewable development. So it would be interesting also to try and elaborate a bit about how will renewable energy and in what form will it become available in the future? What procurement models, what business models will be preferred in China in the future? And as it is of now, what position should multinational takes on renewables in China as it is? So we hope that we'll be able to answer and elaborate on some of these questions. And as Yushin said, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. We will do what we can to answer them as good as possible. And we will have 2 Q&A sessions through the presentation, so there should be multiple opportunities to ask questions. Next slide, please. So a few numbers for you guys, so sort of to try and set the scene of what we're looking at here. Currently, approximately 60% of the energy consumed in the world is consumed by corporates or companies, if you will. And IRENA recently launched a report saying that if you take the current trajectory of renewable development of the world, it is expected that 20% of the energy consumed by corporates will be renewable in 2050. However, if we want to meet the 2-degree challenge, that number should not be 20, it should
Hello, Rasmus. I think we lost your voice for a second. Yes, apologies. We are having a technical problem, and we will get back to Rasmus's presentation in a second.
Corporate world, that may actually be. Oh.
Yes, Rasmus. We have lost your voice, so we can start from the second slide once again.
Okay. So you haven't heard anything, or?
So no, we have heard about the size of corporates responsible for.
Okay, great.
So from there on, we lost your voice. So if you could repeat, it would be great.
Great. So I'll just quickly recap. Basically, Bloomberg News issued a NEO 2018 report stating that it will be very difficult for the world to meet the 2-degree challenge. So, but if the corporate world will be able to accelerate their uptake of renewables, then that may actually be the thing that will help us get to the 2-degree challenge issued in the Paris Agreement. What you're looking at right now is a slide on China that comes from the European Commission report, Science for Policy report. And what you can see here is that 29% of the world's emission is generated in China. And as you can see as well, from 2002 up till around 2014, the curve, which is the yellow line of China's carbon emission, has developed dramatically, and also compared to other parts of the world. Next slide, please. If we then deep dive on China in particular, you can see that from around 2002 to 2015, the amount of emissions related to the power industry, being electricity primarily, and other industrial combustions has actually almost quadrupled in these 25 years. And the numbers below show the same, is that we've had an emission per year that has gone from around 2,300 megatons of carbon per year to almost 10,500 megatons per year. And that is the curve, that is the reality that we need to break. And obviously a lot of this is linked to manufacturing and production in China, as well as a growing number of people as well. But generally the CDP per GDP has gone down in China, but it is definitely an emission that is linked a lot to industry and manufacturing. I think that kind of sets the scene for now. I'd like to hand over to Charles from RE100, give a slight introduction to the RE100, and then I want Charles to elaborate a bit about how we're going to take on some of these challenges. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you, Rasmus. Can you please confirm my voice is audible?
Yes, we can hear you fine, Charles.
Okay, thanks, Shushan. Hello, everyone. My name is Shailesh. I'm technical manager at CDP and mostly working on RE100 campaign. RE100 campaign has become a movement now, so most of you might already know about the campaign and about those companies who have committed to source 100% renewable electricity. However, for those who don't know about the campaign, so it's basically RE100 is a collaborative global initiative uniting more than like 100 influential businesses who are committed to 100% renewable electricity. And so all of these companies have committed to source 100% of their electricity requirement from renewable energy sources. Till date, like around 140, precisely it's 144 companies have committed to source renewable energy worldwide and joined the campaign. So majority of RE100 members are from United States and Europe. However, growing number of companies joining RE100 are from Asia as well. So this number is actually growing in Japan, Taiwan, India, and China as well. So if you look at this right-hand side chart here, so if RE100 were a country, it would be like 24th biggest in the world in terms of electricity users. This is based on 2016 data, which we have collected from all of the RE100 members, and the collective demand of electricity from these companies is 159 terawatt hour, which has reached to more than 160 terawatt hour with the current count. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry, the previous one. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. This one. So looking at RE100 members and their electricity and renewable electricity footprint in China. So in 2016, the companies have reached to is 9955 terawatt hour, 9.5 terawatt hour demand, and 16% of which is like around 16% of electricity consumed by RE100 members in the country. So there are around 23 companies who have reported using renewable energy in China. So if you look at the number of the total count, so basically there are 2 companies headquartered in China who have committed to RE100 campaign. But however, there are many more companies who have operations in China, and that number is close to 23 companies who are actively sourcing renewable electricity. One of the leading and progressive company is Apple, who is basically engaging with their suppliers to drive uptake of renewable energy in China as well as in other parts of the world. So in 2016, so Apple's entire consumption in China was 100% renewable as per the data reported by them to RE100. So that shows the growing user base, a growing number of companies in China who have committed to source renewable energy, and they are also growing their total share of renewable energy in their total energy mix. So next slide, please. The next one. Thank you. So China is a leading market for renewable energy, and as we can see from various, the growth has been done in past few years. China has become a world's leading investor in renewable as well. And China, since like last decade, China has wasted no time in directing like billions of dollars of investment in clean energy sector. So China will invest 2.5 trillion yuan, which is close to 361 billion US dollars into renewable power projects by 2020. This is about domestic market we're talking about. So, and out of that, like about 700 billion yuan will go towards wind farms, 500 to hydropower, and tidal and geothermal getting the rest. This massive demand will create more than 13 million jobs in the sector. So this shows the potential of renewable energy sector within China, and the corporate renewable energy sourcing is also growing, which we will be covering in the next slides. Next slide, please. So, as we have seen on the last slide, on the demand and growing investment in China. So China, and with those numbers, China alone is responsible for like over 40% of global renewable energy capacity growth. This is enormous capacity additions which is going to happen, and that has made China as a world renewable energy leader. The growing demand is largely driven by the concerns about air pollutions and like capacity targets that were outlined in the next five-year plan. We call it 13th five-year plan, which outlines China's renewable energy strategy till 2020, which are we going to cover in the next slide. Next slide, please. So in January 2017, so China launched, basically published the 13th five-year plan for renewable energy, which covers the period between 2016 to 2020. The 13th Renewable Energy Development Plan is actually adopted by National Energy Administration on 10th December 2016, which established targets for renewable energy deployment until 2020. The key objective of this plan is basically increasing share of non-fossil fuel energy in total primary energy consumption to 15% by 2020 and to 20% by 2030, which also increase installed renewable energy capacity close to 680 gigawatt by 2020. It has also outlined plans around increasing installed wind energy capacity to around 200 gigawatt, which includes promoting offshore wind and ocean power development. China also, the plan also leads renewable energy technology innovation via increasing investment in the sector, and which also further support development of the renewable energy industry in China and decrease reliance on basically coal-based power or gray power going forward. The plan also endeavors to resolve renewable power curtailment issues in China. Next slide, please. So here in this particular section, we are going to discuss about various, the first section is basically we are going to discuss about renewable overall electricity market in China, and followed by various renewable energy options available to corporates in China. So as we can see here, the China's power sector is largely managed by state-owned enterprises with a regulated price. In China, both wholesale and retail power prices are regulated by the government and are not updated regularly. So that's the immediate issues we have in China. And the overall power system rewards generator based on the amount of electricity produced. Like that means generators are incentivized to produce as much electricity as possible. So here you can see on the first column, the companies are listed, mostly state-owned companies who are generators, and then system operators who are in the business of transmission and distribution. So all of the power transmission and distribution is taken care by these system generators, and end consumers directly deal with the system operators in the form of basically those customers are commercial and industrial customers and residential customers. Next slide, please. So this particular slide outlines various market-based solutions which is available for renewable energy integrations in the electricity market in China. So in March 2015, China basically kicked off a new round of power sector reform, which aims to further establish and open up the retail market for electricity and improve renewable energy integration. So there are basically 4 general stages of the reform, as you can see here. So stage 1 is basically to decouple transmission and distribution from retail and which allow more retail companies to enter into the market. So that's you can see here stage 1. And the stage 2 is basically to cap transmission and distribution revenues for the system integrator, which we have seen on the previous slide, which require verification and design on transmission and distribution pricing. So this is also a part of the reform. Stage 3 is to promote direct purchasing between generators and retailers and our large consumers. So stage 3 is important in terms of corporate procurement of renewable energy, which allow companies to enter into a bilateral contract with the generator directly and source clean energy to their premises via entering into a contract. And stage 4, which endeavors to establish a wholesale market with marginal cost-based dispatch mechanism and eventually create a fully functioning spot market in future. So that's how the market-based solutions will be available for companies in China to procure renewable electricity via this reform. And we are also going to discuss what kind of options are available to corporates in China aligned with these basically the reform and these market-based solutions going forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So here we have basically outlined these 5 key renewable energy sourcing options which are available for companies in China. However, most of these renewable energy sourcing options have geographic limitations. So, for example, in certain provinces, you can source renewable energy via using these options. However, in certain provinces, you won't find these kind of options available. So this is due to these recent reforms, which may allow like various options for large-scale renewable procurement in China. However, still most of these options are not available fully, and that's the reason we have basically segregated these options into like well-established options now and the options which are emerging in future. So in the next few slides, we'll be discussing more about those options. And Rasmus, I guess from here, you are taking up.
Yes, thank you very much. Next slide, please. We have already gotten some interesting questions. I think I'll head out, and please keep them coming. It's very nice to see that you're so active. But just keep the questions coming. I think we just have a definition question first, Charles, for you. Could you? There's one of in the audience asking, how do you define large consumers? Is that something you would just elaborate on, please?
Yeah. So definition of there is no like general definition for the large consumer, which is that's how we can define large consumers in China. So however, we are talking about here the consumers who have like significant electricity requirements. In some provinces, there are like minimum threshold, but that threshold is also not very much defined to basically enter into certain contracts, as we are going to discuss in future slides. So the bottom line is we do not have any specific definition for large consumers.
Okay, and another question sort of relating to the same thing, I assume, is when do you expect the stage 3, the direct purchase between generators and retail large consumers, to actually be a reality? I know you'll probably elaborate a bit on that as well as we move ahead, but maybe just a quick comment.
Yeah, so I guess this is still an emerging option, and we are going to discuss that in the slides ahead. So it will be good if we can discuss on the slide when we cover that. Okay.
So Charles, we have a question as well around the development of no fossil fuels, and I'm sure you know that that's also something that's on my mind. It has just been announced that a large coal plant of 250 gigawatts should be coming into play in China. How do you see the development or the continued development of coal-fired power plants and gas for that matter as well? Is that going to impact the development of renewables in China?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So as you covered in your slides earlier about this nationally determined contributions, basically NDCs, which we have most of the countries have submitted to the UNFCCC. So you can see that China has communicated to the rest of the world that it has that peaking and drop strategy. So basically it will peak its emissions and then drop that emissions significantly going forward. So I would like to emphasize on this particular 5-year plan, where the strategy is to increase number of basically increase installed capacity of renewable electricity, as well as increase generation from renewable energy sources going forward. So I would say align with this particular strategy to peak emissions first and fulfill its domestic requirements for the renewable energy. This is what something happening right now. But at the same time, there is a strong push for renewables, which is growing.
Exactly, and I think I'd just like to add to that as well, that of course there are a lot of speculations out there about what the future will bring, but in generally what we're seeing reports from either Bloomberg or DNDGWL who are projecting that the emissions of China, or the energy consumption in China, will actually peak around 2030, 2040. So you could say up until then, you will have an increasing need of energy, and that's why you can still have, unfortunately, a development of coal-fired power plant, and at the same time also have an expansion of the renewable sector in China. That will be tipping, projected around 2030, 2040. So hopefully it will be 2030 rather than 40, but that's the projections that we're looking at the moment.
Yeah. And
so Charles, I have another question here. It's around the 5-year plan. For people who've been working in China knows that the 5-year plan is really a very guiding principle. And I'd like to understand, does the 5-year plan, as you see it, have any direct influence on corporates? Is there any targets that they will have to meet? Will the targets be pushed down from a government level down through the regions and cities and states down to the companies? That's number one. And secondly, are the corporates met with requirements, for instance, around the buildings or the developments that they're making, that they need to include renewable energy as part of those developments?
Yeah. So basically around the 5-year plan, this plan doesn't outline any kind of specific targets on corporates to source renewable energy. However, the plan is moreover around, as you rightly pointed out, around the guiding principles towards increasing installed capacity of renewable power generation going forward, which is around 680 gigawatt by 2020, which is huge. However, I would like to emphasize on voluntary targets which companies are taking going forward, and basically these kind of progressive companies are going ahead and working with their supply chain as well to grow more and more renewable energy integration within the value chain.
Okay, and I think I can add potentially to that is that we've seen in previous 5 years plans, actually the 12th on the previous one, where there was a large focus on energy efficiency, that this was actually in some cases translated directly down to the corporates at state level to actually reduce their or increase their efficiency of their plant. And I don't know, maybe that's something we will be seeing on renewables going forward as well.
Yeah,
so please go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No problem. I also want to add here, like the current 13th five-year plan also has few elements which can be useful for basically corporate sourcing of renewable energy. This is something like the government also wants to work towards the issue of power curtailment, which is a big issue there in China. So as you know, like few provinces has more generation, and due to like the transmission infrastructure bottlenecks, that energy is not being transmitted to other locations. So that if that issue is get resolved, that will be like a big relief for companies in sourcing renewable energy from certain provinces.
Okay, we've just a last question for this Q&A session before we sort of head into the what will be happening here is somebody who is interested in if we could just boil it down really and say what are the highlights, if you will, of the top 3 challenges that RE procurement is meeting in China. And the question is asked here, I'm aware that China has different subsidies for industrial power prices for C&I clients. And in light of that, do you expect procurement to be driven by economics or by companies who have RE 100 goals? So if you start out, Charles, I can support you.
Yeah. So definitely the economics is the primary driver for sourcing renewable energy. As you can see in the 2017 RE100 report as well, we have asked companies like what exactly drives them to source renewable energy, and economic driver was like one of the most prominent driver to source renewable energy across the world, and not only in China. That's true. However, I still think there are like voluntary commitments by companies which is actually driving sourcing of renewable energy in like enormous quantity. So I would like to emphasis on the example of Apple, who is working with the supply chain, and most of the suppliers are in China, and they are also helping this particular commitment from Apple's to source renewable energy in China. So one of the example is from like Lens, which is like one of the Apple supplier. As you can see, we have launched a supply chain report focusing on the value chain of different RE100 members, and we have seen like various companies are actually helping basically greening their entire electricity value chain and helping this target to get fulfilled in the defined time frame. So these kind of activities are also growing, which particularly help companies in China to source more and more renewable energy.
Yeah, and I think I'll just supplement you and on the top 3 challenges. I think I'll actually I'll allow myself to only mention 2. I'd say one of the highest challenges for renewables in China is the uncertainty about what is going to happen, what kind of systems will be available, what will they look like. You could say that most of the corporates that are operating themselves in China has Western experience, and it may be, I think it's almost certain to say that what we will be seeing in China in the future may not look like anything we know, and that is a challenge for renewable development. And then secondly, right now, it's basically the availability of renewable procurement options at the moment. So I would say for China specifically and China corporate renewable transition at the moment, those are the 2 major issues. Yeah. I think we should be heading on. Still have another 20 minutes to go. So if you could please take the next slide. The next slide again, actually. What I'll be trying to do here is just sort of a quick recap about the corporates. And I think Charles has already touched upon it indirectly for some time, that we are looking at two different types of, actually we're looking at three different types of companies, but I'm only going to mention two here, is that we have the multinationals owned and operated on one hand. The classic examples is the heavy industry, it's the automotive, it's the medical industry as well. Many of those are originally based in the Western world, transitioned into China. And the drivers they have here is actually what the previous question was about, is many of those are actually, in terms of renewable energy transition, driven by targets, meaning that they are either a top brand and therefore would like to show their social responsibility and their responsibility in general, so they're actually quite target driven. What happens here with a lot of these companies is that since they are very big and centralized in many ways, they'll be pushing out a global strategy out into the local markets. And I think what happens here in China specifically is that there is a lack of corporate level procurement familiarity in China. And as I mentioned before, the opportunities for a variety of different opportunities for renewable procurement is quite limited. Some of the approaches we have here is that they try to have one size fits all. They are generally over optimistic about the opportunities, and I've put PPA here in brackets because it's difficult in these markets to actually set up PPAs the same ways as you know them from Europe and the US. And then what it ends up with is that you would see a scaled on-site solution. So you would have corporates putting solar rooftops on because behind the meter, because that is actually possible. And then we have the Western supply chain. I think the Western supply chain is quite interesting in China. And now Shailesh has mentioned Apple a few times. I think it's a pretty good example. You also have the apparel industry. What we're generally seeing for renewable development, not only in China for supply chain, but also in other parts of Southeast Asia, is that they're driven by their customer requirements. It's quite rare that you see supply chain actually going out and being ahead of their customers, being the multinationals. And in the example of Apple, there's obviously a good synergy between the Chinese-based supplier and the corporates, which together will drive their emissions down. One of the challenges that we hear from the supply chain is that the requirements that comes from the multinationals is not in line with the guarantees for a contract, if you will, and therefore the return of the investment. So we are seeing these supply chains players having a fairly reactive approach to renewables, and what they're doing is they're looking to see if they can develop procurement models that somehow matches the fact that they are asked to install renewables, and they want to make that part of the contract with the multinationals in general. So those were sort of how we've seen the corporates for now. Next slide, please. Whoops, yeah. So what are the multinational corporates looking for? This is sort of back to what are the challenges as well, somehow just flip the other way around. Is that generally what multinational corporates are looking for in terms of renewable procurement is that they're looking for stability and transparency. They would like to invest, but they need to make sure that they understand the setup, and that this is a setup that is not changed in a couple of years, even with retrospective challenges. They want it at a fair price. I mean, of course, they want to make money out of this. They want to make sure that it one or the other way is a good business case. They like to take as low a risk as possible, and they will like to have as low complexity in what they do as possible. And then, of course, in these times where renewable energy development is still sort of in the early days, you have the RE100 companies that are showing the way for others, but then you've got this enormous amount of companies sitting below. And so there is still an opportunity to become a front runner, and therefore the very high credibility of what you are doing, something you can communicate, you can document, is also very important. And then finally, you've got the volume piece. Right now, it may be possible to put solar rooftops on in certain parts of the world, but if you really want to cover your energy consumption with renewables, there needs to be other opportunities available as well. And then I think back to you, Shailesh, for the next one. It'd be interesting to hear a bit more about what are the sourcing options available concretely at the moment, and what do you see coming in the future? So over to you.
Thank you, Rasmus. So in this section, we are going to discuss about what kind of options are available to corporates to source renewable electricity in China. This is largely based on our previous discussion about the electricity, the overview of electricity market, and basically the reforms which has been done and also in progress on certain stages. So largely we have like divided this corporate renewable energy sourcing options into two main sections. So the first section is establish renewable energy sourcing options. So, however, I just want to mention here, established renewable energy options are not still available in few provinces in China. So, the progress is going on, so that companies can also find it useful to adopt those options in those regions as well. But however, these kind of options are adopted by various corporates and in the past, and that's the reason we can call it as established renewable energy sourcing options. So the first option is the direct investment via companies. So here, companies directly invest in utility scale renewable energy projects, and which also owing a specific share of the renewable energy projects. And as you can see here, the company owns the ownership of this particular project, and they can source renewable energy directly. There are few pros and cons, of course, of these options as well. So I would say the pros is, of course, renewable, basically the clear ownership of the renewable energy attributes and the energy from that particular project. However, this is again a significant capital investment from company sides, which comes under cons for this particular procurement options. Also, we need to understand energy generation is not a core business for many corporates. They are into different business, and many of them actually don't want to get into electricity generation. So for those companies, it's important to have other options, like whether they can source renewable energy via PPA or any other options if possible, if they don't want to get into the power generation business. The example of this particular option is again Apple's solar project, which is in Sichuan and Inner Mongolia, wind plants, Henan and Shandong, Shaanxi, and Yunnan, with an equity ratio of 30% in each of these plants. So this is a successful model which is already operational and which set like lots of hope for other companies as well to source renewable energy using these options. Other option is, again, it's a kind of investment from company as well. It's a captive investment, as well as corporates can source energy from on-site rooftop projects owned by other parties. So here companies put the solar panels on their rooftop. Is very straightforward. It's a fast process, and as you know, like most solar projects doesn't have any moving parts. It's very easy to install, and there are multiple players in the market. So this is like a popular options among corporates as well. However, it comes with the cons, like many corporates have limited space available with them, and which normally the power generation from those from the solar panels from that limited space is not generally sufficient for the company's overall operations. However, this option is good in terms of sourcing at least certain portion of its overall electricity requirements from renewables. One of the great example here is IKEA. So IKEA is also committed to increase this on-site rooftop capacity on all of their stores in China and other parts of the world. So, and even Mars has installed rooftop solar on their retail stores and manufacturing facility. So overall, these two options are well-established options, and we have operational example for that. And the popularity is also good in terms of for the on-site rooftop, for the easy access, and for the direct investment is basically for those companies who are ready to do the capital investment in the renewable energy projects. Next slide, please. Thanks. So this is slightly outdated information. However, as you can see, there are various companies who have installed renewable energy power plants, which is distributed basically PV projects on-site projects. So here you can see various examples from Haier, Volkswagen, Coca-Cola, and many others. They have installed on-site solar plants for their electricity consumption locally. So this shows the popularity of the option, this particular option in China. Next slide, please. So the next option which is available to corporates in China is negotiated bilaterals. This option is operational, but it comes with geographical constraints. As I stated earlier, there are various provinces where you cannot enter into such deals because of various policy and other bottlenecks. So negotiated bilaterals are direct contracts which is signed between generators and corporate consumers, and which is normally within a province. So each province has established its own power transaction center, and customers and generators need to include in a government design list to transact in provincial transaction center. So the pros basically is straightforward for consumers to claim ownership of the energy consumed from these particular options, and there are cons as well for this option. So the first is high transaction cost, which is involved in the process, and transactions are also limited with single provinces. For example, if consumer load is in Jiangsu province, the bilateral must be signed between a generator in Jiangsu only. So there is no option to source renewable electricity from other provinces right now. So that's one of the cons. So basically, securing inter-provincial transaction capacity is very, very challenging right now. However, the progress is going on, and maybe over the period of time, these options will be fully available for companies in China to source renewable electricity. The example
Charles, can I just there's just a quick question here. Can you just elaborate on what DPP means, please?
Sorry?
The depreciation DPP, direct power purchase, I assume.
Oh yeah, direct power purchase. Yeah. So yeah, so and there are examples as well for this option. So basically, Jiangsu completed 2.3 terawatt-hour of renewable bilateral deal in 2016, and other example is Inner Mongolia wind thermal bundling DPP, direct power producer. Sorry. So these kind of options are available for companies, and so the bottom line is this negotiated bilateral option is operational, but with geographical constraint. So next slide, please. So yeah, so in this section we are going to cover those procurement options which is available for corporates to source renewable energy. Those options are available, but not fully available, I would say, and most of these options are emerging. So let's start with the first option, which is renewable energy certificates. So renewable energy certificates, as the market for renewable energy certificates is already established in other parts of the world. So it's a fairly similar concept. So renewable energy certificates are certificates which is verifying the generation of renewable electricity, and basically it's a production certificates, and customers that purchase RECs can claim they are consuming renewable electricity. So that's the best part about this. So these are unbundled energy attribute certificates which are available to corporates to source renewable energy. So there are two markets for REC in China. So the first one is national REC market, which is recently started. And the second option available in this domain is basically international renewable energy market, which is also operational, fully functional in China. So
Shailesh,
under national REC,
sorry to interrupt you, but we are almost running out of time. So it would be nice if you can wrap up, but continue as you were.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So so the generators basically under the first option, which is national REC system, is generators forego government feed-in tariff subsidy, and if they sell RECs to the corporate buyer. So that's the only thing, important thing the corporate customer need to understand. But this is from the generator side. For the consumer side, it's fairly available. So consumers can buy RECs and fulfill their renewable energy requirements. So the pros is basically RECs are available, which is like very easy to buy and demonstrate renewable energy uses in the country. And these both kind of options are available to corporates. So that's the best part about this. There are cons as well, like RECs and basically all energy attribute certificates are always additional cost to the company. So consumers need to buy electricity separately and energy attribute certificates separately. Another cons is there is no secondary market exists yet for the RECs in China. So example here, you can see the national REC pilot started in July 1st, 2017, and IREX is already functional, and there are various examples of companies as well, like Tetra Pak, who purchase RECs engaging to power their plant in Beijing. Next slide, please.
Charles, I suggest we go to the barrier slide at the end if we need, because we still have a little bit time for questions as well. We would like to keep that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go to the barrier slide. Okay, so we have discussed in the previous section as well about through various questions we got about barriers for corporate sourcing of renewable energy in China. So the first barrier is basically lack of stakeholder knowledge and capacity. So as Rasmus clearly pointed out in the beginning, that most of the corporate buyers are Western buyers having operations in China, and also the regional buyers in the value chain, in the supply chain, and clearly the lack of stakeholder knowledge and capacity in establishing those kind of contracts, as we discussed earlier via these procurement option sections. So that's the one barrier for companies there. The absence of wholesale market, definitely that's the second barrier companies are facing there. So availability of wholesale market makes most of the things easy for corporates to source renewable electricity, but that's not available in China. However, with this reform, the government endeavors to develop basically the spot market going forward for electricity, which will be helpful for companies going forward. The high transaction cost for the bilateral contracts is definitely is a big barrier for companies because the cost comparison between the electricity they are getting from the utility and from these contracts via adding this transaction cost is not it's basically not driving this economic benefits to companies. So that is creating a barrier in terms of sourcing electricity via those contracts. Curtailment risk, as we stated earlier, so in some provinces there's high generation available from renewable energy sources. However, with this transmission and distribution infrastructure bottlenecks, the curtailment is happening, and which is a regular exercise in China. So that's how companies cannot source renewable electricity from those regions. And in the 13th five-year plan, the government is also working on to basically remove curtailment risk going forward. Grid constraints is also relevant to curtailment risk only. So their transmission and distribution infrastructure is key for bilateral contracts, and interprovincial transmission congestion as well, which is restricting companies to source renewable energy, and it is also linked with policy bottlenecks there. So these are the basically barriers available in the market for companies, and to resolve this, the companies need to work together and along with the different stakeholders, including government, going forward. So
okay, thank you. Thank you, Charles. We have, I know time is very limited. We've already extended our time here, but I think we still have time for just 2 quick questions. Would that be okay with you, Shushan and Marco? Because
yes, sure, Rasmus. We can address 2 questions.
And I'll encourage you to write directly to Charles Rai if you have any questions that we didn't manage to answer in the time available here. But just to try and pool it a little bit, we have quite a bit of interest on the bilaterals. There are questions about where you could find more details about the 2.3 terawatt hours of Gansu as an example, I assume. And another someone else in the audience is interested in understanding, when you negotiate the bilaterals, how long time does it take, and is there any knowledge of either single off-takers or multiple off-takers on these bilaterals? If you just spend a minute on that, Charles, please.
Yeah, so based on the information reported by various companies as a part of RE1 and annual reporting, so we just used to understand from this market, from these companies in the past, that it takes considerable time to understand the market first. And based on our earlier discussion, it can reach to like 8 months to 10 months of duration to understand just how the things will happen in terms of bilateral contracts. That's on the time requirement. But though these are based on like very restricted discussions, so with very few number of companies as a part of the campaign.
Okay. Yeah. And there are some questions around the RECs. I know this is still just guessing, but how are you foreseeing the you could say the government response to international certificate versus their own Chinese system? Do you have any experience of that? Do you have any knowledge of how those things will coexist in China?
Yeah, so the voluntary system for the RECs was already functional before the national REC system. So basically the idea from the government, not only in China, but we have seen that elsewhere in the world as well. So governments wants to move ahead from feed-in tariff scheme and to pay this extra premium value in the form of feed-in tariff to the generators. And that's the point where this national REC system works. So where voluntary buyers will buy those attribute certificates from the generator, and the generator get that extra value, and government don't need to pay anything on the top of that. So that's how it works. However, in terms of corporate sourcing of renewable energy, it's absolutely fine to buy those attribute certificates, because those are completely eligible to make credible renewable energy uses claims, both national system as well as international REC system.
Okay, thank you. Our time is up now, and I know there are questions that we did not manage to answer. Apologize for that. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either Charles Wright directly, and we will do everything we can to answer your questions via email or phone call, or what's suitable for you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rasmus and Shailesh, for sharing the very interesting insights. I found it personally very interesting, and I hope our audience too. Indeed, if you have any questions that have not been answered, feel free to send to us by email, and we will share it with Rasmus and Shailesh. And lastly, I would like to show our upcoming events in Singapore, in Africa, in Kigali, and in Colombia, in Bogota. So if you have any interest in these regions, feel free to check the websites. Now, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much to our speakers for taking the time to join the webinar, and I wish you a very good day. Goodbye.